Hi, this is Eric Camino with PPMD. I'm going to be talking to you today about clinical trials, so some of the language involved, different aspects of the clinical trials and things to consider if you want to participate in a clinical trial, as well as the tools that PPMD has developed to help either you or your child, if you're a caregiver, find the right clinical trial. So to start, we're going to talk about what the purpose of a clinical trial is. And these are studies to understand the effect of a drug or a device in a human population. So when we're talking about Duchenne, although there have been some device studies, we are typically discussing the evaluation of safety and efficacy of a new or repurposed drug. And I'll be referring to those as investigational products. So it's important to note that clinical trials are experiments. They are not treatment. These new drugs and repurposed drugs still need to be evaluated to see if there is any benefit provided for the Duchenne population. And so the data that's collected during these clinical trials is what is needed to shift it from an investigational product to an approved product by the FDA. And although they are experiments and not treatment, safety is a priority. These trials have oversight from institutional review boards. So at the institution where a trial is taking place, there are measures to review the protocol, make sure everything is ethical. And then oftentimes there are data and safety monitoring boards, and these are made up of experts that are not a part of the sponsor running the trial, and they receive reports and can help make decisions on whether it's safe to continue with the trial and testing the investigational product. So you will see a number of different phases of clinical trials in Duchenne. We have products at every stage of development. When you hear us refer to preclinical trials, that means we're talking about products that are being evaluated in the lab or in animal studies. So this can be in cell culture or maybe a mouse. And it's looking for, does it look like this investigational product may be beneficial for Duchenne? So this is the work that has to be done before a product can be tested in humans. The first trial in humans, these are going to be the phase 1 trials. This might be done with healthy volunteers. It might be done with the boys with Duchenne, and it's looking to assess safety, typically looking at something like toxicity to make sure that it's okay, that there aren't a number of adverse events with the particular drug, and I'm going to get into a definition of adverse events here in a little bit. The phase 2 trials, these are typically dose-finding studies, and sometimes the first evaluation of efficacy. So is the drug providing any benefit? Depending on how these trials are designed, there may be some placebo included. Phase 3, these typically are the pivotal trials. So this is the evidence that is going to be used to go to the FDA to move towards approval. These tend to be larger studies. In Duchenne, that might range anywhere from 120 to over 200 boys included in the study, and very likely that they will have a placebo arm included in these studies. And then the last one are the phase 4, which are sometimes referred to as post-marketing. You'll sometimes hear them called post-approval studies. And this is just to continue assessing the safety and efficacy of this approved drug now that it is in the wider population of patients with Duchenne. So in rare diseases, you will sometimes see different phases combined. So not everything's a clear-cut 1, 2, 3. Sometimes you'll see a phase 1, 2. And also the patient sizes are going to be a lot smaller than what you see in some of the more traditional clinical trials. For instance, with some cancer drugs, they might look at 3,000 patients. We obviously do not have the numbers to do that in Duchenne. A few terms that might be helpful when you're hearing some of the sponsors talk about clinical trials, or you're discussing it with your clinician, inclusion and exclusion criteria. And these are going to be the requirements that basically say whether you or your child is eligible for the trial. And this can be any number of things. It can be restrictions on the age. It can be for certain ambulation statuses. It can be whether or not you're taking steroids or you're steroid naive, or maybe it's a mutation-specific investigational product, and so if you don't have the mutation that would benefit, you can't participate. And that's because trials are really designed to very, as fast as hopefully possible, show whether a drug is efficacious, if it's providing benefit. And then hopefully, if a drug can show benefit, it can be approved and the whole community can then have access. When we talk about placebo, this is just the inactive product that is given to a patient to compare to the investigational product that's being tested. And it's a good way to make sure that that investigational product is truly providing benefit. You'll often hear the mention of the primary outcome measure, and so depending on the phase of the trial, this is going to be the test that's used to assess either safety or efficacy of the product. So that can be a biomarker, so some maybe protein that they're looking for in the blood or the urine. It can also be a functional test. So some of the functional ones that you may be familiar with, and maybe you or your child has done in the regular clinic visit before, something like the 6-minute walk test or the North Star Ambulatory Assessment, which tend to look at skeletal muscle function, maybe forced vital capacity, if we're talking about an investigational product trying to improve pulmonary outcomes, or if it's something to do with the heart, they might do an MRI. And then another term you'll hear occasionally is adverse event. And so an adverse event is any unfavorable change in a patient's health. And this does not necessarily have to be related to the investigational product, but any unfavorable change during the course of the clinical trial for a patient is recorded and tracked. And then it's under the responsibility of the investigators and the sponsors to decide whether that was due to the drug or whether it was from some other non-drug related aspect. And then you'll also hear about serious adverse events, and so when that term is used, that's for an adverse event that was considered life-threatening. Death also falls under serious adverse events. Informed consent. So this is the process that is undertaken at the beginning of any clinical trial. And so it's you or your child committing and agreeing to participate in a clinical trial. So there is a document called the informed consent form. This is something you will have to sign to agree to participate in a trial. And it contains a lot of really helpful information for you to understand what you or your child would be participating in. So potential risks, it might have some of the benefits, things like the timeline of the study, or some of maybe the expected side effects of the investigational product will be in there. It's important to note that you can and you should ask for a copy of the informed consent, so you have time to review it. Take it home with you, review it with your family, maybe share it with your physician. Just that way you, again, feel informed and empowered about your participation in the clinical trial. And during that process, you will learn a lot of details about the trial, and that is your opportunity to ask as many questions of the research team as you need to feel comfortable about participating. These can be really lengthy documents. We highly recommend coming prepared with a list of questions. We do have a list of questions on our website that we recommend you thinking about. There's another website I'm going to show at the end of this called clinicaltrials.gov. They also have some questions to think about. But it's good to maybe make that list, bring a notebook with you, so that way while you're discussing it, if any additional questions come up, you can jot them down and make sure that you have those answers. And it's important to recognize that no question is too small. So whatever you need to feel comfortable. So if that's knowing what the expected, what the side effects that were seen in the animal models was, feel free to ask that. It could even be, will the sponsor cover the cost of gas to travel to the clinical trial? You are allowed to ask anything you want and try to have those answers provided by the research team to the best of their ability. And then if you're a caregiver and your child is participating in a trial, usually once they're 7 or older, there will be an assent document. And so this is the informed consent for your child, for them to also agree to participate in the clinical trial. The language in this is going to be much different than the language in the informed consent. Depending on their age, they're going to use different language to help try and explain to your child, what's expected of them and what they can expect while participating in a clinical trial. So we're going to go over some risks and some of the burdens and the benefits of participating in clinical trials. So, of course, one of the bigger risks with participating in a clinical trial is that the investigational product may not work and it may not be better than the routine standard of care. Again, this is the process that we go through to find out if these investigational products can indeed provide benefit. As I showed in some of those different phases of clinical trial, there may be a placebo arm, and there's a chance that you are initially, when you enroll, that you're put on placebo and not the investigational product. Now, for a lot of studies, there usually is an opportunity when you're on placebo to cross over and start receiving the investigational product. The details of that and the timeline for when that happens should be in the informed consent. And if you're not sure, again, speak to the research team about it. They should be able to explain that process to you. Of course, like any drug, these investigational products may have unwanted or potentially harmful side effects. Again, you can ask about maybe what some of the expectations are from animal models. That may not predict everything that's going to happen in humans, but it may have you, prepared. And it may impact your ability to participate in other clinical trials. So when we talked about, there's the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Often, trials will exclude patients who are currently in another active trial. And that's just because if you are taking 2 different investigational products, it's really difficult to be able to tell which one of those products is providing benefit. And so they might not be able to use that data with the FDA. And the other part of it impacting your ability is if you do end up dropping out of a trial or the trial ends, typically you have to go through a washout period before you can participate in another trial. And that washout is just a length of time to make sure that effectively the investigational product you were on is out of your system. So again, it's that making sure another investigational product isn't influencing results of the current trial you're participating in. Some of the burdens to consider when you're thinking about participating in a clinical trial. There are travel costs associated with studies, and this can take the form of gas or hotels, parking, even food at the hospital. If you have other children, you might have to pay for childcare while you're not at home. Now, a lot of these costs can be covered by the sponsor. So it's important you ask, again, during the informed consent process. Great time to ask, what will be covered? How will they do it? Are they going to pay for it up front? Are they going to send you a check or give you, an electronic, kind of like a debit card? How is that going to take place? What is going to be on you and what is the sponsor going to cover? The schedule of visits can also be a potential burden, depending on what that schedule is like. And you may have to take time off work. You may have to use your own personal leave or vacation time. For the boys, they may miss school. For some of the adults, that might mean missing classes in college or time away from work themselves. And then there's just, depending on the visits and what they look like, that might mean losing out on some time with their peers. And these visits can be, it can be a multiple day visit. They can be weekly visits or monthly visits. That schedule should be outlined in the informed consent, and you should be aware before you're participating, but it's just something to kind of keep in mind while you're making your decisions. And the trial that you're interested might not be in your area, so that could also impact how far you have to travel and how that works in with those study visits. Right, so that's the risks and the burdens. Now let's talk about some of the benefits. First of all, and I think the reason why most individuals end up participating in a clinical trial is it does give you access to these investigational products. So these products could be providing a benefit, and this is your opportunity to have access to them prior to approval. And that is a pretty big draw. And then often, and this should be outlined in the informed consent as well, and something you can usually ask the research team, there may be something called an open label extension. They sometimes call them long-term follow-ups. But after you are done participating in the clinical trial, there may be opportunities for you to continue receiving that investigational product for a longer period of time until hopefully the investigational product is approved. Providing benefit to the community, and this is a really big one. These investigational products cannot become approved products without the appropriate testing. And if we don't have willing participants from the community, these studies can't get full enrollment, they can't generate enough data, and then they won't be able to be improved. So it's really, necessary that we have willing individuals from the community who will help participate in clinical trials. And then, of course, the more individuals that we have that are willing to participate, the faster these trials can be filled, and the data can be gathered to see if the products are providing benefit or not. And then often, this is a way to provide benefit to the community for those individuals who don't have the opportunity to participate in clinical trials, either because they don't have the financial means, or maybe they live in a rural area and they can't travel to any nearby sites. And so their only opportunity for receiving new therapies is for those therapies to be approved through this clinical trial process. And then, of course, there's access to medical experts. These visits are likely to occur outside of your typical 6-month or 1-year visit, and so you're going to have more interactions with care providers, which is always welcome. And then it may not be your typical care team. It may be different experts at a different site, so you can kind of expand your care team. Now, if you're interested in participating in clinical trials, we do have a number of resources available to help you, look for trials and learn and make decisions. We have our interactive drug pipeline, and that has information on different investigational and approved products. And we use family-friendly language. That way, if you don't have a science or a medical background, you can still understand what the purpose of the product is, and whether it's something you would, potentially like to participate in a trial for. So as an example of kind of what the pipeline looks like, we have it grouped in different therapeutic areas. So here I grabbed the restoring the cell's energy area, and there's a couple of different investigational products that are there. And so we typically put these therapeutic areas together on products that are targeting similar kind of endpoints, though usually through different mechanisms. So here, looking for ways to help improve dysfunctional mitochondria in Duchenne. And then if you click on any product on the pipeline, you'll get taken to a page with more detail. So, there's a nice description, again, in family-friendly language, describing what the expectations are for what we think the investigational product might be doing in the body and how that might benefit someone with Duchenne. You can see information on where the clinical trial is at in development, who the sponsor is, and then, of course, we have the media library, which is great if you're trying to understand even more about any of these products. Any of the webinars we've done with a company, any company that has presented at one of our annual conferences, we put all of that media on there so you can watch, a 15-minute video or an hour-long video about the product to learn more. In terms of the therapeutic areas, these are the 7 areas that we group them into. So we have, restoring or replacing dystrophin. So any of these investigational products that are, going after the fact that Duchenne is caused by that absence of dystrophin. And then we have the other very important downstream targets in the disease. So looking to combat fibrosis, regulating calcium, which can be really important for both the muscle, and, the skeletal muscle and the cardiac muscle. Products looking to reduce inflammation, and these can be, potentially layered on top of steroids or maybe as an alternative to a steroid. Products that we hope will, promote muscle growth and protect the muscle, as I already showed, restoring cellular energy. And then, of course, some of our more traditional cardiac drugs looking to protect or improve heart function. We also have the Duchenne registry, which is, we just moved to a mobile app. The great thing about the Duchenne registry is you go on, you fill out your information or your child's information, and when we recruit for a trial or help a company recruit for a trial, you will only get notified if it's a trial that you would qualify for. So you don't have to worry about getting inundated with all these trials that you or your child can't even participate in. You're only going to get ones that you would be eligible for, which is, really helpful to narrow down potential trials to join. We also have a trial finder tool on the website that you can look at different trials in different stages, whether they're actively recruiting or not. And then we have a bunch of filters to help you find out, am I or my child the right age? Do we need to be on steroids? Is it mutation specific? So you can use some of these to help narrow it down. It's a great tool to hop on with your clinician or someone from your care team to help maybe guide you through and find a couple trials that may be right for you. And your care team in general, at, wherever the institute where you're getting taken care of or your child's being seen, they may have trials going on that are investigator-led, and those also might not involve an investigational product at all. It could be a natural history study. So if you don't want to take an investigational product, you might still be able to contribute to the learnings of Duchenne. And they might have other sponsor initiated trials at their site, or they might know of other sites where you could go to participate in a clinical trial. So your clinicians are a really great resource. And there's also clinicaltrials.gov, and this is a website that sponsors, so the pharmaceutical companies are required to post information about clinical trials on. I would recommend this is, towards the end of when you're kind of narrowing down. There's a lot of information on there. It's really helpful to go over with your clinician, but it also can be a bit overwhelming. When you go to clinicaltrials.gov, you can, search by condition or disease. So you can put in DMD, and then you can just hit search, and you will get every clinical trial that's been done in DMD, and then you can try to sort through what's active and not. If you have a specific sponsor or drug that you're trying to look for, you can put the terms in. But again, this is something that, your care team should definitely be familiar with, and it's a great tool with them to maybe look at some more of that inclusion-exclusion criteria, some of the functional outcomes that you or your child are going to have to participate in during the trial. So it's a great resource for that. So those are all the resources that we have that can help you find trials, and just kind of end on, what the current clinical trial landscape looks like in Duchenne. We have 3 approved products. We're hoping over, the next coming years that we get a number of these investigational products to patients. And it's your participation that really helps drive this forward.